Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking a scalpel to an idea that I think most of us just take for granted.
Yeah.
The very definition of what it means to be a good person.
Mm-hmm.
We're diving into some source material that presents a really profound and frankly unsettling challenge. It argues that simply being kind or pious or, just personally decent, it's not just insufficient. It might actually be a catastrophic moral failure.
That is the essential insight of this analysis, yeah. I mean, the sources we've compiled, theological, historical, philosophical texts, they all kind of converge on this one single, powerful warning. And it is this. If those who embody goodness choose to remain passive...
If they just become observers.
Exactly. If they become observers rather than actors, the whole universal order starts to break down. One text summarizes it so starkly. It just says, if the good sleep, goodness sleeps too.
And when goodness sleeps, what happens?
Well, the world doesn't just stay neutral. It naturally tilts toward disorder. And in that vacuum of active virtue, the environment inevitably devolves into... well, the sources chillingly call it a prison for the good and a palace for the evil.
Wow.
So passivity doesn't protect you. It actually enables the very corruption that will eventually consume you.
That's incredibly compelling to me.
Yeah.
It turns inaction into something really consequential, something with the cost to the collective. And they frame this passivity as a deep betrayal of our primary human role, which they define as stewardship. Or hilafet.
Exactly. Hilafet isn't a title you hold, it's an active mandate. It means we are meant to be conscious, proactive caretakers of both the physical world and the moral world. If we fail to actively caretake, if we just worry about our own little corner, we're essentially deserting our post.
Which raises this fascinating historical riddle that really ties this whole concept together. The Prophet Muhammad was, before revelation, known as El Amin, the trusted one. Everyone relied on him. He was the epitome of that passive goodness, honest, reliable, quiet. But then, almost immediately after he gets his first command to speak out, his own community turns on him. They start calling him El Meknun, the madman. I mean, how does a man go from being the most trusted figure in his society to a complete social pariah seemingly overnight?
And that right there, that's the pivotal moment. It's what defines the necessity of active goodness. His reputation only fractured because he shifted from being good within the system to actively challenging the system. As long as he was passively good, the system loved him.
Of course, he wasn't a threat.
Not at all. But the moment he received that divine command, arise and warn, he stood up and started to intervene in all the societal corruption and injustice.
So he didn't do anything less good. He just, his goodness became proactive.
Precisely. His goodness became kinetic. He crossed this invisible line from being personally respectable to being politically and morally dangerous to the status quo. And the sources are really clear on this. Passive good people might ignore this reality, but the powerful insight here is that in any societal space where goodness is passive, evil automatically becomes active and organized.
Okay, let's unpack that, because this means we need a much more nuanced framework than just, good versus evil. We need to understand how goodness is measured and how it's executed. The sources seem to draw a line between actions that are purely for yourself and actions that are for society.
This distinction it's foundational. We have two primary types of good actions, which the sources call agilic.
All right, so let's start with the kind of goodness people usually think of.
That would be the first type, hasanat. And we can define this as passive goodness. These are actions directed solely inward toward the individual's own, let's say, spiritual account. So think personal prayer, fasting, performing the pilgrimage, the Hajj. They are entirely self-benefiting. And the source material is very specific about the return on this investment. It is capped. One good deed earns 10 rewards. It's a fixed 1-to-10 ratio. Necessary, yes, but limited.
So, personal piety, spiritual maintenance, I get a steady, reliable return, but there's a ceiling. Now, what's the difference when we start talking about active goodness?
That's the second type, salihat. Or active goodness, often called salih amel, which means righteous deeds. These are actions that are restorative, which the sources term islah. They're directed outward toward a third party, the community, society, all aimed at increasing collective well-being. These efforts actively serve the goal of sulh, which is global peace and harmony.
So the crucial implication is you're moving from just self-improvement to world improvement.
Exactly, and the incentive structure reflects this dramatically. The sources state that while hasanat is capped at 1 to 10, the reward for salihat is unlimited. It earns paradise. And that's a philosophical statement, right? It's saying societal engagement is fundamentally valued more highly than personal devotion alone.
That 1 to 10 ratio really hammers home the ceiling on personal piety. It suggests that if you stop there, at personal righteousness, you're kind of missing the entire point of the mandate. But I'm still struggling with that idea from earlier, calling the passive good person an encourager, a tespixisi of evil. That just feels incredibly harsh. I'm surely someone who is devout, who fasts and prays, but just minds their own business. They're not actively cheering on corruption, are they?
It is a harsh label, but it's meant to force accountability. The sources argue that evil doesn't need applause, it just needs apathy. By failing to use your intellect, your time, your resources to counter injustice, even if you personally hate that injustice, you create the space for it, the opportunity, the permission structure for it to flourish. You maintain the comfortable status quo that the wicked exploit. In that sense, your silence encourages their loudness.
So inaction becomes an active ingredient in the recipe for societal decay. And this brings us back to the cosmic context, which is where this material really takes off for me. Why is human passivity seen as such an abnormality?
Because everything in existence is defined by motion. I mean, just take the physical world. The matter we call dead is active at the most fundamental level. Electrons are constantly orbiting the nucleus. Our celestial bodies, the planets and stars, they are perpetually revolving. There is no stillness in the physical universe.
The universal law is movement.
And the sources apply this same activity to the divine, describing God, or Allah, as continuously creating and sustaining. They use the term halak. Activity is the inherent nature of reality. Therefore, for a being endowed with free will, intellect, and conscience, the three tools of action, to choose stillness, to choose passivity, is described as a cosmic defiance. It's a rejection of the universal law.
It's like throwing a wrench into the whole system, spiritually speaking. Okay, so if we accept this diagnosis, that we have to move from passive hasanat to active salihat, how do we do it? How do we initiate that shift? What's the mechanism?
The sources propose a kind of formula for this transformation derived from what they call the alembic of life. This is the structure for forging an activist identity, and it's broken down into three essential components, the three A's: ashka, adanmashluk, and adiyat: love, devotion, and belonging.
Let's start with the foundation, the energy source, ashk, love or passion.
Right, but ashk here is not just an emotion. It's defined as the highest manifestation of kazibe, the universal gravitational or attraction force. It's the magnetic pull that dictates all motion, whether it's an atomic orbit or a human motivation. Without ashk, there's no movement, there's no action. But again, we have to differentiate.
The active versus passive split in love, too. I'm sensing a pattern.
Absolutely. Passive ash, or passive love, is consuming. It's possessive, self-centered. The sources use this chilling analogy of a python strangling its victim. It destroys the object of its affection by trying to completely absorb it. This leads to what they call two-person loneliness.
Two-person loneliness.
Wow.
So passive love is a destructive force dressed up as affection. What does active love look like then?
Aktivasht is reforming. It's restorative. It elevates the object of its love and inspires action directed outward for the betterment of others. And the greatest manifestation is hubbullah, the love of God. And this love is disciplined. It requires immense internal restraint.
Okay, give us a concrete example that disciplined love in action.
There's a famous anecdote from the era of Caliph Omar that illustrates this perfectly. There was a young man known for his intense, almost deadly passion for a woman. When he was finally allowed to meet her, he stood before his beloved but immediately lowered his eyes. He wouldn't speak anything inappropriate. He was restrained not by a lack of desire, but by this overwhelming fear of God that disciplined his love. He left the encounter and died shortly after, literally overwhelmed by the intensity of his restrained emotion, yet having protected his faith.
Wow, so he physically died from the intensity of the restraint, not the passion itself. That is a powerful illustration.
It is. And Caliph Omar, when he heard the story, declared that this young man had earned 2 gardens, citing the verse that promises dual rewards for those restrained by fear of God. This proves that love guided by restraint isn't diminished, it's multiplied. The ultimate test of this active love, the sources note, is feda, or sacrifice. Can your love for the cause of goodness outweigh your love for self, wealth, and family?
That's the ultimate litmus test. So if love is the foundation, what does the construction of an active life look like? This brings us to the next phase, practical commitment. Adan mushluk. Devotion.
This is where the rubber meets the road. Devotion is what separates the transactional person, the hasabi, who's always calculating cost and benefit, from the dedicated person, the Hasbi, who focuses entirely on the mission, regardless of personal loss.
It's the difference between clocking in and devoting your entire life to the work.
Precisely. The sources even categorize this commitment. There's institutional devotion called Nezir, exemplified by Mary or Miriam, being dedicated to the temple. But then there's individual devotion, Tebtil, which is the prophet's example of total dedication.
And the prophet's shift is so key here. The source notes that after he received the command, "Arise and warn," he never went back to his old life as a successful, respected merchant. He just shut down that entire part of his identity.
His whole existence became the answer to one single question. How does a person dedicate his entire being to God's cause? And that dedication inevitably requires a cost, a bettel. It demands a sacrifice that goes way beyond convenience.
What's the most vivid example of that cost you found in the sources?
I think it has to be the companion, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. He was nearly 90 years old when he joined an army marching 3,000 kilometers toward Constantinople. He wasn't motivated by youthful zeal for war or glory. He was simply moving because of his commitment, his adan mashluk, to the cause. He actually died on that march. I mean, that's the kind of commitment that transcends calculation. A 90-year-old walking 3,000 kilometers because the mission demanded it.
That total dedication, the adan mashluk, it really explains the immense impact these figures had. Whether you look at Socrates, who chose execution over abandoning his mission, or Saladin Ayyubi, who devoted his life to a unified cause, they were the Adnan Mashlul, the devoted ones.
Which brings us to the final component that solidifies this identity, the thing necessary for action, idiot.
Belonging. This one feels immediately relatable. I think of identity politics, tribalism, all of that. The sources use a fantastic biological analogy here.
They do. To understand true identity, you have to understand belonging. A seed must belong to the soil to grow. A cell that loses its true belonging, its purpose within the organism, it becomes cancer. It turns against the body it should support. Loss of belonging is malignancy.
So belonging is the anchor, but what specifically should the active good person belong to? That seems like a critical distinction in our fractured world.
It is the most critical distinction. The sources stress that true belonging is to principles and values, the eternal framework from divine revelation, vahi, not to specific people, or kishlar. If your devotion is solely to a personality, what happens when that person dies? The devotion dies. The cause collapses.
And we saw that danger play out right after the prophet's death, didn't we?
Exactly. After his passing, some tribal groups refused to pay the obligatory alms, the zakat, to Abu Bakr. They argued their allegiance was only to the Prophet himself, the leader. And Abu Bakr, operating on principle, treated this refusal as apostasy, as turning away from the faith itself. That historical moment validated that belonging must transcend the individual. It has to be anchored in the immutable principle.
That really reinforces the difference between loyalty and principle. And this idea of true belonging, it also impacts our definition of freedom.
It does. The sources contrast modern freedom, doing whatever you want, with divine freedom, doing what is right. When an individual chooses to be rootless or placeless, they call it yursizlik. They think they're achieving freedom, but they're actually suffering from existential alienation.
Because they've lost the principles that give their actions meaning.
They've detached themselves from the soil that feeds them. So active goodness requires anchoring yourself to universal principles, ensuring that your identity is constructive, not cancerous.
This has been a necessary and a really challenging deep dive. We've covered the necessity of the shift. Passive hasanat isn't enough. The true mandate requires active salihat. And to make that transition, we need to activate the 3 A's, the reforming love, ashka, the principled commitment, adam mishlik, and the principle-driven belonging, yet.
And as we bring this discussion to a close, we return to the starting line. For you, the listener, the final provocative thought from these sources centers on how you initiate this change. The transition to active goodness is not a matter of destiny or nasib, but a matter of demand.
Talib. Wait, I like that. What's the difference between destiny and demand in this context?
To claim something as nasib is often the excuse of the passive good person. They say, well, I guess I wasn't lucky enough to lead a great life. It outsources responsibility. But the sources assert that action doesn't passively happen to you. You must demand it. You must actively talib it. And the very act of demanding it is the first kinetic activity required to become an active good person.
This transforms the individual from a hopeful spectator into a dedicated force. It requires you to actively pull the future toward you.
Indeed. The true active good person is the yoke of the traveler. You have to embark on the journey of action. The path will be hard, and you will see others quit or complain, but the sources offer this final, sharp challenge. Those who arrive are the ones who walk. You have to start moving.